They accuse a black woman of theft, but the revelation about her husband will surprise you. Emily Johnson walked into the luxury store, her heart racing with excitement. The environment was stunning, with bright lights reflecting off showcases filled with sophisticated clothing and expensive accessories. She had always dreamed of trying on a dress that looked like it came straight out of a fairy tale, and now, faced with that reality, she couldn't contain her admiration. The delicacy of the fabrics, the vibrant colors, and the impeccable cuts made her feel like she was in a dream. After all, I deserve this, she thought, as she made her way to the fitting room. But as she passed under the watchful gaze of Charlotte, the store manager, a chill ran down her spine. Charlotte was a middle-aged woman with an air of authority that seemed to intimidate customers. Her fixed and suspicious stare made Emily feel like an intruder in a place that should have been welcoming. "Excuse me, but are you sure you can afford that?" Charlotte asked, her tone masking a subtle disdain. Surprised and offended, Emily replied, "I'm just trying on the dress. I'm not here to cause any trouble." Charlotte merely raised an eyebrow, averting her gaze. "Just be careful. We're not interested in incidents." After a few minutes, Emily finally slipped into the dress she had longed for. The soft fabric caressed her skin, and she looked at herself in the mirror with a smile. "You look beautiful, Emily," she whispered to herself. It was a moment of joy, a small triumph amid the pressures of everyday life. However, the light atmosphere was quickly shattered. As soon as she stepped out of the fitting room, Charlotte stood with her arms crossed, looking increasingly annoyed. Without warning, the manager approached and in an abrupt gesture set off the store alarm. "You need to leave, now," Charlotte said, her voice firm but with a tremor of nerves. "Excuse me? What's going on?" Emily asked, confused. "You know very well. I saw you taking something," Charlotte accused, drawing the attention of customers, some with shocked expressions, others with curiosity. Before Emily could react, the door swung open and 2 police officers entered, their authority evident. "What's going on here?" asked one of the officers, Tom Harris, looking between Emily and Charlotte. "She tried to steal a dress," Charlotte said, her words dripping with venom. "I can't allow this to happen in my store." Confusion engulfed Emily. "This is a mistake. I was just trying on the dress," she started, but her voice faltered as she felt the judging stares of the customers upon her. "Please, ma'am, we need you to come with us," Tom said, his expression neutral but his eyes revealing doubt. "We need to clarify this." As she walked toward the exit, Emily glanced around, searching for a supportive gaze, but only saw indifferent faces. The world that had once seemed so bright was now becoming a prison. The feeling of injustice began to settle in her chest, and tears threatened to spill down her face. "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything," Emily exclaimed, her voice echoing in the now silent store. "We'll sort this out, Ms. Johnson," Tom replied, but his words brought no comfort, only an echo of helplessness that enveloped her. Upon exiting, she noticed a group of customers watching, some murmuring, others with disapproving expressions. "She must have done something," a woman whispered, and the words cut into her like a sharp blade. Emily felt the weight of injustice, not just from the situation, but from a society that often judged her before even getting to know her. The day that should have been a moment of joy was now turning into a nightmare, and Emily's life was about to change forever. Emily sat in a cold, windowless room, the bare white walls seeming to suffocate her. The environment was impersonal and rigid, reflecting her predicament. Officer Tom Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, entered with a notepad in one hand and a pen in the other. He settled in front of her, observing her with a look that attempted to be neutral, but betrayed a hint of disbelief. "Emily Johnson, do you know why you're here?" he asked, his voice firm but not without a touch of skepticism. "I didn't do anything. I just went into the store to try on a dress." "I didn't steal anything," she replied, her voice trembling but determined. Frustration and indignation bubbled within her, and the feeling of injustice made her want to scream. Tom made a note and lifted his gaze as if weighing each word she spoke. "The store manager accused you of theft. We have witnesses who confirmed that you left the store with something you didn't pay for. But that's not true. I didn't leave with anything," Emily insisted, clutching her hands in her lap. "I just wanted to try on the dress. I was just daydreaming, and she saw me as a criminal just because of my color." The officer hesitated for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Emily, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. If you tell me the truth, I can try to help." She took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage necessary to expose her vulnerability. I went into the store, and as soon as I saw myself in the mirror with the dress, I felt beautiful. It was like living a dream. But the manager, she looked at me with disdain and started watching me. I didn't do anything wrong, I promise. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, David was in a frenzy. He arrived running, his heart racing, but was immediately stopped by a police officer at the entrance. "Sorry, sir, you can't go in. Ms. Johnson is being interrogated." "I'm her husband," David exclaimed, worry etched on his face. "Please, I need to talk to her. This is a mistake." The officer looked at him, but the rules were clear. "Just a moment, sir. As soon as the interrogation is over, you'll be able to see her." Frustrated, David called a colleague, a lawyer, his voice trembling. "Chris, it's urgent. Emily was arrested for theft. She didn't do anything. You need to help me." Meanwhile, at Charlotte's home, the store manager was having dinner with friends. They were discussing the incident, laughing and commenting on the situation. "I did what I had to do. I can't let just anyone come into the store and walk out with whatever they want," Charlotte defended, a confident smile on her face. One of her friends, Sarah, looked at her with a concerned expression. "But don't you think that was a bit extreme? The woman was just trying on a dress. What if she's innocent?" Charlotte frowned. "Innocent or not, I can't take risks. What if she had really stolen something? I can't let that happen in my store." "But what if you're wrong? You accused her without knowing the truth," Sarah insisted, her voice now more assertive. Charlotte hesitated, feeling a pang of doubt. "I did what I thought was right. What if she was just trying to take advantage of the situation? You can't deny that most thieves look like her." This last remark hung in the air, revealing the deep-seated prejudice that Charlotte still couldn't recognize. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, the tension between Emily and Tom intensified. "If you help me understand, I can do something about it," he tried, now with a more conciliatory tone. "How can I trust you?" Emily shot back, distrust evident in her gaze. "You're part of the system that wrongfully imprisoned me." Tom fell silent for a moment, reflecting on his own beliefs and the rigidity of his position. "I don't want injustice to happen. If you tell me the truth, I can be a voice in your favor." "I just want the truth to prevail," Emily replied, sadness echoing in her voice against the walls of the room. She knew the fight was just beginning, but the hope that someone would listen to her was a small ray of light amid the darkness. David Thompson sat at the conference table in his office, surrounded by a team of lawyers who looked at him with expressions of concern. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with palpable tension. He was the only one seemingly lost in his thoughts, his mind swirling with the injustice his wife Emily was facing. The buzz of the City of London echoed from outside, but inside the room the silence was almost deafening. "We need a plan, David," said Vanessa, a junior attorney on the team, breaking the silence. "The situation is deteriorating. The media isn't giving us the coverage we need." "I know, Vanessa, but what more can we do?" David replied, running his hands through his hair. "She's innocent, and everyone is just looking at the color of her skin. We need witnesses, something that can contradict Charlotte's version," suggested Marcus, one of the more experienced partners. "If we can find someone who was in the store and can confirm that she did nothing wrong, that could help." "And what if we don't find anyone?" David asked, his voice heavy with despair. "She doesn't deserve this, and I can't even go to the precinct to see her." Meanwhile, at home, the tension was also palpable. David tried to maintain his composure in front of the children, Sophie and Lucas, who were restless on the couch. The atmosphere was thick, the silence interrupted only by the sound of the television in the background, which was broadcasting news about Emily's case. "Mom is going to come back, right, Dad?" Sophie asked, looking at David with curious and worried eyes. "Yes, sweetie, she's going to come back," David replied, trying to smile, but his voice faltered. "It's just that things are complicated right now." Lucas, younger and not fully grasping the situation, felt the tension in the air. "Why is Mommy in jail? She didn't do anything wrong," he exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice. David knelt beside his son, looking him in the eyes. "I know, son. She's a good person and we're fighting for her. It's going to be okay." But deep down, he knew the struggle would be tough. And while he tried to comfort his children, the image of Emily being treated like a criminal haunted him. The next day, David decided that the only way to fight for Emily was to bring the situation to light. He organized a press conference in hopes that media coverage could change the narrative. But upon arriving at the venue, he realized that most reporters were more interested in gossip about his personal life than in his wife's case. "David, what do you have to say about your career?" And about the accusation that you're not paying attention to your family? A reporter asked, as the camera focused on his face. I want to talk about my wife, Emily, David replied, his voice firm. She's been wrongfully accused of a crime she didn't commit. We need to look at the prejudice that's ingrained in our society. Emily is not just a victim of this accusation. She's a woman who dedicates her life to helping others. The questions kept coming, and David felt like he was fighting against a wall. He realized that many of the reporters were not ready to listen. If you don't mind, I would like to focus on what really matters, the fight against racism and injustice that so many people face every day. Meanwhile, in her cell, Emily was battling loneliness and despair. She sat in a cold corner, her gaze lost in her own thoughts. It was hard to believe that all of this was happening to her. When the bars opened and another prisoner walked in, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "Hi," said the new prisoner with a curious look. "I heard you talking to the guards. What happened?" "I was accused of theft," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "But I didn't do anything. I'm here because of prejudice." The prisoner nodded as if she had heard this story many times before. "Me too. Here we all have our stories. But we need to support each other." Emily smiled, feeling a small comfort in that connection. "You're right. We need strength. I want to fight, but I don't know how." "We'll do this together," the prisoner replied, determination shining in her eyes. "If you need anything, let me know. Together, we can be stronger." Outside, David continued his fight, determined to bring to light the truth about Emily and the injustice she faced. He knew that no matter what happened, the fight against prejudice and injustice was a battle that could not be ignored. Emily sat in her cell, her eyes lost on the cold, bare walls as the echo of guards' footsteps resonated through the corridor. The dim light filtering through the small window barely illuminated the space, but it couldn't extinguish the flame of hope that still burned within her. Around her, other women shared the same reality of injustice, some with tired looks, others with the determination to resist. It was in this setting that Emily began to feel a connection with those prisoners. "You're not alone, you know," said Maria, a gray-haired woman with a firm expression as she sat down next to Emily. "We all have a story to tell. We all carry the weight of injustices. I just wanted to try on a dress. I never thought this would lead me here," Emily replied. Her voice choked as she tried to hold back tears. "And now, I'm stuck for something I didn't do." Maria nodded, understanding Emily's pain. "Life isn't fair, dear. But here inside, we find strength in each other. You can use your voice. There is something you can do, even here." Inspired by Maria's solidarity, Emily began conversing with the other prisoners. They shared stories of discrimination, abuse, and despair. With each account, her certainty that her struggle was not just personal grew stronger. "We need to unite," said a young woman named Aisha. "If we manage to make ourselves heard, maybe we can change something." With this in mind, Emily decided she would write a letter that would speak of her experience, about how racism and discrimination can devi. She borrowed a piece of paper and began drafting her thoughts. "Dear community," she started, the words flowing with renewed impulse. "I am here, in a cell, accused of something I did not commit. My life has been turned upside down, not because of my mistakes, but because of the erroneous perception of a woman who does not know me. I am a mother, a wife, and most importantly, I am a woman who dreams of a better future for my children." As she wrote, Emily felt each word resonate in her heart. No one should be judged by the color of their skin or by their appearance. Prejudice kills dreams and destroys lives. I urge you to stand against this. Join me in this fight. The next morning, as the weak sun illuminated the cell, Charlotte, the store manager, was at home, grappling with her own dilemma. Since the day she called the police, her world seemed to have flipped upside down. She couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the letter she had read in a local magazine. Emily's words echoed in her mind, increasingly making her rethink her actions. "You can't be right about this," said her activist friend Lucas when they met for coffee. "The injustice you helped perpetuate could have irreparable consequences." "But I thought I was doing the right thing," Charlotte replied, distressed. "I didn't know she was a woman with a family. I only saw an intruder." "You saw the color of her skin before you saw the person," Lucas replied firmly. "It's time for you to confront your prejudices. You can change this." Those words affected Charlotte deeply. She began to reflect on her privilege and how her actions had impacted another person's life. That morning, as Lucas spoke, she realized she could no longer remain silent. "I need to do something," she said, determined. "I need to apologize and help this woman." "That's a good start," Lucas agreed, encouraging her. "But you must prepare for the consequences. Change takes courage." Charlotte felt a knot in her stomach, but there was also a newfound determination. Over the following days, she became involved in anti-racist movements, participating in protests and reflecting on the role she had played. Meanwhile, Emily's letter spread through the community, inspiring others to join the fight against discrimination. Emily in her cell did not know that her voice was resonating beyond the cold walls and silence surrounding her. Yet she felt she was doing something greater for all who faced injustice. The fight was just beginning, and her heart pulsed with the hope that change was possible. During the hearing set to discuss Emily's case, the atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with tension and anticipation. The seats were packed, with reporters jostling for space in the front rows, ready to capture every word that would be spoken. David Thompson, a criminal defense attorney and Emily's husband, was determined to expose the truth. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath, preparing to confront the prosecution. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," David began, his voice steady, "today we are not just here to discuss a theft case. We are here to discuss the humanity and dignity of a woman who has been unjustly accused." He paused, allowing his words to echo in the room. Emily Johnson is not just a suspect. She is a mother, a wife, and a woman who dedicates her life to helping others. As David spoke, Emily observed from the defendant's bench. Her heart raced, but there was a determination in her gaze. She knew her story needed to be told. David continued, "Furthermore, I would like to present evidence that not only shows Emily's innocence but also her connection to the community." David called a witness, an old colleague of Emily's who worked at a local shelter. "Please tell the court what you know about Emily," David requested, gesturing with his hands. "Emily has always been an advocate for the less fortunate," began the witness, a middle-aged man with a respectful demeanor. "She donates her time and resources to help children in vulnerable situations. The last time I saw her, she was organizing an event to raise funds for a community center." The audience murmured. Seizing the opportunity, David looked at the jury, where some members began to show interest. "Thank you. And what do you think of Emily's character?" he asked. "She is a person of integrity. She would never do anything illegal," the man replied, looking directly at the jurors. "I know her well. She is a woman of principles." David's defense was gaining momentum, but the prosecution was not ready to back down. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Helena, stood up and began to question the testimony. "And you really know her so well, sir? Isn't it also possible that she was just trying to get out of a complicated situation?" The man hesitated, but David intervened gently. "With all due respect, Miss Helena, that is a diversion tactic. We are here to speak about the truth, not about assumptions." Tension rose as David turned to the jury. "Emily is a woman who does not deserve to be here. She is facing this accusation because she is black, and this store, like many others, reflects a society still struggling with prejudices. What happened to her could happen to any of you." In the audience, Sophie, David, and Emily's daughter watched with tears in her eyes. She had become involved at school, and her project on racial discrimination was gaining traction among her peers. Hearing her father speak, her heart filled with hope, but also with deep sadness for the injustice her mother faced. "Ladies and gentlemen," David continued, "I want you to remember who Emily is. A woman who not only faces injustices but also rises to fight against them. She is not the villain of this story. She is the heroine." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened and Charlotte, the store manager, walked in. She was visibly nervous, but there was a determination in her stride. When David spotted her, his heart raced. The opportunity to confront the woman who had caused so much pain to his family was finally here. David did not hesitate. "Charlotte, can you please stand up?" He stared at her, his voice now more intense. "You know what you did was wrong. You know Emily is not a criminal. What made you call the police?" Charlotte hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor. I didn't think it was that serious. I was just following my instinct," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Your instinct? Or your prejudice?" David questioned, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "You had the chance to reflect on your actions. Now is the time to tell the truth." The courtroom fell silent, all eyes on Charlotte. The weight of her decision seemed to crush her, and finally she looked at Emily, her eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Emily. I truly am. I didn't believe you were innocent. I let fear and prejudice speak louder. Charlotte's declaration reverberated in the courtroom and the atmosphere shifted. The truth was beginning to emerge, and Emily's upcoming testimony promised to be a turning point. Charlotte was in a state of confusion. The words of her activist friend Maya echoed in her mind as she looked out the window of her stylish apartment in London. The day was overcast, reflecting the storm of emotions that consumed her. As someone who always considered herself progressive, the recent controversy involving Emily forced her to reevaluate her beliefs and actions. What had she done? How could she have been so insensitive? That night she met Maya at a local cafe. The atmosphere was cozy, the soft candlelight creating an intimate setting, but Charlotte felt restless. As soon as they sat down, Maya looked at her with a serious expression. "Charlotte, we need to talk about what happened with Emily," Maya began, taking a sip of her cappuccino. I know, Charlotte replied, running a hand through her hair. "I can't stop thinking about it. I thought I was doing the right thing." "Doing the right thing? You called the police on a woman who was just trying on a dress. Do you realize that this is racism?" Maya questioned, her voice laden with concern. "You didn't see her reality. You saw your own distorted perception." Charlotte felt a wave of shame wash over her. "I didn't want this to happen. I let fear and what others thought guide me. I never thought it could ruin her life." Maya sighed, her gaze soft but firm. "Charlotte, this isn't just about you. It's about the life of a woman, a mother. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. And honestly, I expected more from you." Those words cut deep. Charlotte felt exposed, stripped of her illusions. "What can I do now? How can I make this right?" she asked, her voice choking. "Start by educating yourself. Get involved in causes you've never considered before. You need to understand the struggles that people like Emily face every day. You need to become part of the solution, not the problem," Maya suggested, encouraging her. "And who knows, you might even find yourself at protests or awareness campaigns." Charlotte nodded, but uncertainty still consumed her. "What if I fail? What if I'm seen as a fraud?" "You're already a fraud if you do nothing. Change begins with the humility to acknowledge your mistakes. No one expects you to be perfect, but you can be an ally," Maya said, a determined glint in her eyes. After their meeting, Charlotte returned home, her heart heavy but her mind buzzing with new ideas. She sat at the kitchen table, grabbed a notebook, and began jotting down everything she could do. Participate in anti-racist protests, donate to support organizations, educate myself about the history of racism in the UK, she thought, as the pen glided across the paper. The next day, Charlotte decided she needed to talk to Emily. The thought terrified her, but she knew it was necessary. With her heart in her hands, she made her way to the prison where Emily was being held. Upon arrival, she felt the weight of her conscience. How could she apologize for something so devastating? When she was finally allowed to enter, she found Emily sitting in a small room, looking out the window. Emily's expression was serene, but there was a sadness in her eyes that cut Charlotte like a knife. "Emily," Charlotte began, but her voice faltered. Emily turned to face her, without any trace of hostility. "Charlotte, what are you doing here?" I came because I needed to talk to you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For calling the police. For not seeing who you truly are," Charlotte said, her heart pounding in her chest. Emily looked at her for a moment, and Charlotte noticed how the woman took a deep breath as if processing her words. "You don't need to feel bad for me, Charlotte. You need to understand the impact your actions have on other people's lives," Emily replied, her voice calm but firm. "I know, and I want to change. I want to do something to help combat injustice, but I don't know where to start," Charlotte confessed, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Start by educating yourself, just as you said, and more importantly, listen to the stories of others. It's not just about you or your guilt. It's about the collective struggle for justice," Emily advised, her gaze penetrating. Charlotte felt tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Emily. I promise I'll do this. I want to be an ally." Emily smiled faintly, and Charlotte felt that even in her pain, there was a path to hope and change. What once seemed like an endless abyss now had a faint light, and Charlotte was determined to follow it. Tom Harris was sitting at his desk at the precinct, surrounded by piles of reports and documents. The atmosphere was heavy, and he couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that had accompanied him since he got involved in Emily Johnson's case. He had heard her stories, David's words, and no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, doubt lingered in his mind. He remembered the first time he saw Emily in the luxury store. He could feel Charlotte's suspicious gaze cutting through the air. Now, he found himself in a moral dilemma he could no longer ignore. "Tom, are you okay?" his partner Jake asked, interrupting his thoughts. "You seem distant." "Just thinking about the case of the black woman who was accused of theft," Tom replied, shaking his head. "It's all very complicated." "She was caught red-handed, wasn't she?" Jake said with a tone of disdain. "This is what happens when you try to reach for what you can't have." "You don't understand," Tom countered, raising his voice involuntarily. "She did nothing wrong. The girl was just looking at a dress. Look, I'm not saying it's fair, but you know how the system works. Sometimes it's easier to blame someone who doesn't look like most of us," Jake replied, avoiding Tom's gaze. "That's just reality." Tom felt a wave of frustration. He didn't want to be part of a system that perpetuated injustices, but at the same time, he knew that questioning it was risky. What bothered him most was Emily's daughter, Sophie, who had become a beacon of hope amidst the chaos of the case. He had met her during a school visit, where she spoke passionately about racial discrimination, leaving a lasting impression on him. That afternoon, Tom decided he needed to do something. He got in his car and drove to Sophie's school. Upon arriving, he found the girl in a corner of the courtyard, organizing a project on injustice and equality. She looked determined, her eyes shining with hope. "Sophie," he called, approaching her. The girl looked up, surprised, but soon smiled upon seeing him. "Mr. Harris, what are you doing here?" "I came to see how you're doing. I heard you're working on a project about racism," he said, sitting down beside her. "Yeah, I'm trying to show how people are treated differently just because of the color of their skin," Sophie explained, filled with enthusiasm. "My mom is innocent, and I want everyone to see that." "You're doing a great job," Tom praised, feeling a wave of admiration for the young girl. "Can I help in any way?" "Of course, I want to make a presentation for the school and maybe a campaign in the community," Sophie replied, excited. "But I need more information and support." Tom hesitated for a moment but then made a decision. "I can help gather data and maybe even rally some people who want to support your cause." As they talked, Tom realized that next to Sophie, he was beginning to question his own beliefs. The girl, with her innocence and determination, served as a reminder of what truly mattered. Deep down, he knew he couldn't just remain stuck in his position within the police. He needed to be an ally. In the days that followed, Tom became involved with Sophie's project. He helped her collect information and organize an event at the school. During the meetings, he noticed how other students began to take an interest and engage in discussions about discrimination. This encouraged him even more, and he started to question the orders he received at work. One night, during a police operation, Tom found himself in a delicate situation. He was part of a team that was going to approach a neighborhood known for its history of crime. When they arrived, the tension was palpable. The operation leader, an older and more traditional officer, began to give instructions, but Tom, remembering Sophie and what was at stake, felt conflicted. "We need to act cautiously," Tom said, raising his voice over the noise. "Let's make sure we're not just repeating the mistakes of the past." "And what do you suggest, Harris?" the officer replied dismissively. "Should we worry about what's right or what's safe? Did you decide to be the champion of justice now?" Tom took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of his position and the expectations of his colleagues. "I suggest we treat everyone with dignity, regardless of what society has taught us. We need to be better than this." Tom's words hung in the air, and he realized he was at a turning point. He could no longer ignore the injustice before him, and Emily's family's fight had become personal. He decided that no matter what happened, he would stand up for what was right, even if it meant opposing his own colleagues. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere charged with tension and expectation. Chairs creaked under the weight of the jurors and the audience, who watched closely every movement. Emily's entrance was met with murmurs. She, in an elegant dress that wasn't from the luxury store but exuded strength, took her place at the defense table. Her eyes were steady, full of determination. David, beside her, prepared his documents, focused. When the judge hammered the gavel, silence fell. The prosecution began with a rehearsed speech, but the coldness in the prosecutor's gaze was evident. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence is clear. The defendant was caught at the scene of the crime, and we have the testimony of Charlotte, the store manager, who claims to have seen Emily steal a dress." The prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom, but a look of uncertainty settled over the audience. The prosecutor's words didn't seem to convince everyone. David stood up, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, I would like to present our defense. The judge nodded, and he turned to the jury. The prosecution's case relies solely on the words of a single witness who, believe me, has reasons to distort the truth. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Charlotte, as the store manager, has a history of discrimination, and her decision to call the police was influenced by deep-seated biases. Murmurs rose in the courtroom, and David continued, Emily is not just a black woman. She is a respectable citizen, involved in her community, someone who fights against discrimination, and now I ask you to listen to her story. He turned to Emily, who stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. I entered that store because I dreamed of trying on a dress I had always admired. I had no intention of stealing, she began, her voice steady but slightly trembling. When I was approached, I didn't understand what was happening. I was just trying to fulfill a dream, and I found myself trapped in a nightmare. She looked at the jury, her eyes shining with emotion. I believe the distrust I felt in that store wasn't just about me. It was about a system that has already decided that people like me don't belong in certain places. Silence fell once again, and David, realizing the power of Emily's words, decided to intervene. If I may, I would like to present evidence that contradicts the prosecution's version. He turned to the judge, who nodded in affirmation. I'm calling Charlotte to the witness stand. Charlotte stepped up to the stand, her expression a mix of nervousness and defiance. The defense attorney began. Charlotte, you were the first to call the police, correct? Yes, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. I saw Emily taking the dress. You were alone in the store at that moment, weren't you? David questioned, his voice calm yet penetrating. No, there were other people. She hesitated. So you felt threatened by her, even though other people were present? David continued. Can you tell us what really led you to call the police? Charlotte hesitated, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I thought she was out of place. There was something about her that made me uncomfortable. Something about her? David repeated, raising an eyebrow. Do you admit that your perception was influenced by prejudice? Charlotte's face paled. That's not what I meant, she stammered. But that's exactly what you're saying, David pressed on, his voice rising in intensity. You weren't just defending your store, you were perpetuating a cycle of distrust and racism. Your decision to call the police was based on a feeling that a black woman shouldn't be there. David's words reverberated in the room. Charlotte seemed to have lost her composure, and the judge watched her with a neutral but attentive expression. The audience was silent, some murmuring among themselves as the gravity of the situation began to crystallize. I didn't want this to happen, Charlotte finally said, her voice now almost a whisper. I didn't know she was such a good person. I just saw a different woman. The courtroom was divided, and the tension increased with each passing moment. David, sensing Charlotte's hesitation, insisted, So, you admit that your perception was wrong. This isn't just about Emily. It's about how society judges people based on their appearance. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically, and David's words echoed in every corner. Emily, with a resolute look, prepared for the next stage in her fight for freedom and dignity. The trial was far from over, but the truth was beginning to emerge as a beacon of hope in a sea of injustice. The courtroom was silent, the tension hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. Emily Thompson, wearing a simple dress that highlighted her dignity, stood before the judge, her eyes fixed on the audience. The prosecuting attorney, a middle-aged man with an unwavering expression, looked at her with disdain. David, her husband, sat in the front row, his hand clenched at his side, his heart racing. Do you remember the last time you were in the store, Emily? The prosecuting attorney began, his voice echoing in the room. You were alone, weren't you? Yes, Emily replied, her voice firm but laden with emotion. I was just admiring a dress. The attorney raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And what did you do when you decided to leave the store? I left without buying anything, Emily said, her voice rising slightly. I didn't commit any crime. The audience murmured, many seeming to doubt the sincerity of her words. But when David stood up, interrupting the court, things began to change. If I may, Your Honor, he said, his voice resonating with authority, I would like to present new evidence that could change the course of this case. The judge, raising his eyebrows, nodded for David to proceed. He walked to the evidence table, grabbing a folder containing printed photos and documents. These photos show what really happened in the store. I would like the court to see them. He projected the images on the screen, depicting the interior of the store where Emily had been accused of theft. The images captured not only her presence but also the movements of other customers. One in particular caught attention: a man moving stealthily behind Emily, placing something in her bag while she was distracted by the dress. "This is the moment Emily was incriminated," David explained, his voice carrying the urgency of the defense. "She wasn't stealing. She was the target of a setup. The images speak for themselves." The audience fell silent again, absorbing the evidence. The prosecuting attorney struggled to maintain his composure, but doubt began to creep into his gaze. "And why didn't you mention this before?" he questioned, trying to destabilize the defense. "Why didn't you call attention to this man?" "Because I didn't know he was there," Emily replied firmly. "I was focused on my dream, on the dress. This isn't just about me. It's about how people can be misinterpreted and judged." The atmosphere in the courtroom was shifting. The audience now seemed more supportive, and the murmurs that had once carried a tone of distrust began to transform into whispers of understanding. David felt the energy in the air change around him. He looked at Emily, who still maintained a dignified posture, but now there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "What concerns me," the prosecuting attorney continued, trying to regain control, "is the motivation for your presence in the store. What were you really doing there?" "I was dreaming," she replied, her voice now filled with emotion. "Dreaming of trying something I never thought would be possible for me. I am a black woman in a society that tells me I don't have the right to that. And when I was accused, it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us who fight against prejudice." The audience was silent, the weight of her words echoing in every corner of the room. David noticed tears in the eyes of some people. He himself felt a lump in his throat. The prosecuting attorney, now clearly at a disadvantage, tried to change tactics. But Emily's words had planted a seed of doubt in everyone present. Finally, the judge, with a serious expression, asked everyone to calm down. He knew he was witnessing a crucial moment. Emily's words and the evidence presented by David not only challenged the prosecution, but also exposed the flaws in a system that often allowed injustice to prevail. The courtroom lights were adjusted, and everyone anxiously awaited the continuation of the trial, aware that the fight for justice was far from over. The courtroom was filled with palpable tension, the anticipation hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Emily Thompson, her heart racing, watched the judge, who seemed to weigh each word before delivering his verdict. Beside her, David held her hand, transmitting strength through his touch, his gaze fixed on the magistrate's expression. The crowd in the room was a mix of supporters and critics, and the pressure was almost unbearable. "Are you ready for the decision?" the judge asked, his voice echoing in the silent room. Emily took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Yes, Your Honor," David replied firmly. He couldn't let his insecurity show. The judge finally declared, "After hearing the evidence and testimonies, I declare the defendant, Emily Thompson, innocent of the theft charges." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The pressure dissipated for a moment, and Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her body. But the celebration was short-lived. Before she could process the victory, a prosecutor stood up, interrupting the festive atmosphere. "Your Honor, we would like to present a recently discovered security video. We believe it may be relevant to the case." The judge looked at the attorney, surprised. "What do you mean by that?" The attorney, with a confident smile, replied, "This video shows the store manager, Charlotte, tampering with evidence against the defendant. I believe it is in the interest of justice that this is shown now." The courtroom fell silent, the tension returning with full force. Charlotte, who was sitting among the spectators, immediately turned pale, her eyes wide as the video started playing on the screen. The audience watched in shock as the footage revealed Charlotte placing a dress at the bottom of Emily's bag, then making a call to the police with a facade of false concern. "No, it can't be," Charlotte whispered to herself, her body trembling with panic. "This isn't happening." The judge looked at Charlotte, his eyes stern. "Are you aware of the consequences of your actions, ma'am?" "Your Honor, I didn't mean to do this. I was just—" "You were merely perpetuating an injustice," the judge interrupted, his voice firm. "The integrity of the justice system cannot be compromised." David couldn't believe what he was witnessing. "Charlotte, why did you do this?" he asked, his voice filled with incredulity. Charlotte, now visibly shaken, looked at Emily, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just so scared of losing my job, losing everything." "And you thought destroying the life of an innocent woman was the solution?" Emily replied, her voice steady despite the pain. The judge ordered that Charlotte be taken into custody, and the room began to stir with applause and murmurs of indignation. Emily turned to David, tears in her eyes. "Is this really the end?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, my love. This is just the beginning. The world needs to hear your story," David replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. As Charlotte was led away, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to change. People started to rise, applauding and cheering in support of Emily. She turned to the audience, feeling the warmth and strength of the voices backing her. Sophie, who was at the back, joined the commotion, her eyes shining with pride. "Mom, you're a hero!" she shouted, running to hug Emily. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just a woman fighting for justice," Emily replied with an emotional smile. However, what no one knew was that this moment was just the beginning of something much larger. Days later, Sophie decided to create a foundation in her mother's name, dedicated to promoting racial equality and justice. In her presentation to the class, she said, "If my mom could fight against injustices, so can I, and together we can make a difference." The audience rallied in support, and the foundation quickly gained notoriety. David, now a social justice advocate, joined Emily and Sophie, forming a powerful trio. The Thompson family, united and strengthened by adversity, became a symbol of resistance and hope, inspiring many others to stand up against injustices. That night, as they gathered at home, Emily looked at her family and said, "We don't just fight for ourselves, but for all those who have no voice. And together, we will continue our fight." The love and determination in the room were palpable, and the family knew that despite the challenges ahead, together they could face anything that came their way.